My Little AJ, written by Freddy's Nightmare 1984. It was just another normal day for me. And my normal days are never very exciting. A lot of young people think that once you've retired, you pretty much have all the freedom you want. This is true, but the problem for me has always been figuring out what to do with all that freedom. In a nutshell, being retired isn't all it may seem to some. It can actually be quite boring at times, but I couldn't complain. I had a pretty good life. I lived on the outskirts of a small town on 2.5 wonderful acres. 2.5 acres was more than enough for me and my animals. My little family consisted of an orange and white tubby cat named Tigger, turkeys, ducks, several chickens, and some goats. I suppose you could call my little place a farm, although my daughter and I jokingly referred to my place as the zoo. But then one day something happened. Something that I never in a million years expected would ever happen to me. I walked out of my house ready to go into town and buy some more chicken feed, since I was almost out. I glanced up at the sky, which was starting to turn a light shade of gray. I knew that the forecast called for some rain later that day, so I wanted to hurry and get some of the feed before the rain set in. I got in my white pickup truck and drove off down the road, all the while thinking of my daughter's last visit. My 20-year-old daughter, Julian, visited me as often as she could, which was usually a few times a month. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been excited to show me a new television program that she's been watching. My daughter might have been 20 years old, but that didn't stop her from watching the occasional cartoon. And she had all too eagerly to show me her newest favorite, My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. Now, I remember My Little Pony from Jillian's youth. She always she was always fond of the pink ponies. After watching the show for a bit, one pony stuck out from all the others. At least, to me she did. Applejack, the orange earth pony. Something about her caught my attention as soon as I saw her. It felt strange at the time, but I felt as though I had some sort of connection with her. There was just something about her that stood out from the other ponies. Of course, I liked them all, but Applejack was instantly my favorite. And ever since that day, I watched My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic as often as I could. At first, I felt a little silly for loving a kids show so much, but before long, I became aware of a part of the show's fan base called the Brony. Well, I guess it's official. I am officially a Brony. Well, on that particular cloudy day, I was driving to the feed store trying my best to beat the rain. That's so I need to get caught in a downpour, I thought sarcastically as I parked in the parking lot of the feed store. I wasn't in there 5 minutes before I heard a light rain hitting the roof. Great, I grumbled as I hoisted the bag of feed onto my shoulders and quickly made my way to my truck. Not wanting the bag to get wet, thus ruining the feed, I put the bag in the back seat and quickly got into the driver's seat, shaking rainwater from my hair as I closed the door and shoved the key into the ignition. Starting up the truck and driving cautiously onto the now slick wet road. I turned on my headlights and drove slowly. Thankfully, the road wasn't very busy. I sighed, turning on the windshield wipers as the rain picked up even more. I only got about a mile down the road when I noticed a big cardboard box sitting in the ditch. The box was quite large, the type that a big TV would come packaged in. I thought nothing of it and kept driving. Suddenly I jumped, nearly skidding off the road. The box. It had moved. I was sure of it. Is there something alive in there? I thought hesitantly as I brought the truck to a stop. I sighed, shaking my head. My mind was playing tricks on me. I knew perfectly well that there are cruel people in the world, but would someone really be cruel enough to put a living creature in a cardboard box and leave it in a ditch? In the pouring rain, no less? I glanced in my rearview mirror, confirmed my suspicions. Yes, there was most certainly something alive in that box. Sighing, I pulled up my collar of my denim jacket and turned off the truck, not wanting to waste the battery just sitting there. I opened the door and got out, my boots squishing in the wet grass. I walked over to the box. Hesitantly, I slowly got down on my knees and peered inside. What I saw was a complete, absolute shock. There, inside the snagging box, was a small creature, about the size of a year-old beagle. It shivered in the cold, so I knew it wasn't a stuffed animal. It was getting dark out, so I quickly went to my truck and grabbed my flashlight. I went back over to the box and kneeled back down on it, turning the flashlight on and shining it inside. I nearly dropped the flashlight in shock of what I saw. A small orange pony crawled up in a tight ball. It looked to be just a baby, not very old at all. It looks like, I thought, but it couldn't be. It just couldn't be. I leaned closer, studying the small creature. It had a long blonde mane and tail, which were shaggy and unkempt, and weren't held back by hair ties. Her flank was bare. So, if this really was the pony I thought it was, then she hadn't received her cutie mark yet. My heart was racing as fast as I stared at her, at a loss for words. This can't be happening, I thought to myself. I looked around. There were no houses in sight, and no one was driving down the road from either direction. I sighed, looked down at the filly. Startled when she slowly opened her big emerald green eyes and looked up at me. As soon as our eyes met, I felt as though a spark of energy jolted through my entire body. There was something about this small filly. Sighing again, I slowly stood up. Still leaning over the box, I hesitated for a second before I slowly reached my hand out to her. Her eyes widened and she whimpered, scrambling backwards, obviously afraid. But the cardboard box was snugging very low from the rain, and suddenly fell apart as soon as she leaned against it. I gasped, leaned down, picking her up. She cried out and struggled in my grip. It's all right, I stammered, trying my best to calm her. I struggled toward the car, still holding the squirming filly in my arms, and managed to get the door open and got into the pickup, shutting the door and quickly pressing the lock all doors button. I sighed as she continued to squirm. I talked quietly to her, and after a few minutes, she became still. I sighed, shivering a bit since I was soaked from the rain. I slowly set the filly down in the passenger seat, slipping off my jacket and tucking it around her. She seemed scared of the jacket at first, but soon settled down in the seat and laid her chin on the armrest. Looking up at me, she sleepily, I sighed, hesitantly reaching towards her. She sniffed a little as I stroked her head, but relaxed once more. She realized I meant her no harm. I shook my head as I started the motor and continued my drive home. Home. What the heck was I going to do once I got home?
Okay, just calm down, I tried to tell myself as I drove off down the road after sitting in my truck for a few minutes, my mind reeling. After all, it's no big deal. You just found a fictional orange pony in your passenger seat that's most likely a figment of your imagination. Nothing weird about that. Yeah, the conversation in my head wasn't helping. The more I tried to stay calm, the more I wondered what was going on. Why was the filly here? How did she get here? Why is she here? Does she really exist, or am I just simply losing my mind? I sighed lightly, hanging my head against the wheel in frustration. When I lifted my head, I felt eyes on me. I turned and saw that the filly had her head up and was staring at me. She didn't look afraid anymore, only curious. I bet you're as curious about me as I am about you, huh? I said. She only blinked and tilted her head slightly like a curious dog. I sighed again, shaking my head as I finally spotted my house up ahead. The rain had let up a bit, something that I was thankful for. I pulled up by the house and turned off the truck, slipping the keys into my pocket and glancing over at the filly, who had laid back down and snuggled into my jacket. I got out of the truck and quickly walked over to the other side, opening the passenger door and slowly picking her up. She squeaked a bit, but didn't squirm as much as before. I glanced around, even though I knew no one could possibly see us. My house is on a hill surrounded by beautiful countryside, and the closest neighbors are 4 miles down the road. After checking that the coast was clear, I quickly went up the back porch steps, fumbling to get the keys out of my pocket. Once I had the door open, my cat Tigger ran toward me, meowing and winding around my feet. Tigger was a stray cat Jillian had found a few years earlier. He was more Jillian's cat than mine, but since Jillian's roommate Sasha was allergic to cats, Tigger had to live with me. He was curious about the bundle in my arms, but I was hesitant to lean down and let him sniff at the filly. I couldn't be sure how he would react. "Hold on, Tigger," I said, setting my keys on the keykeeper hanging by the back door and slowly going into the living room. I sat in my recliner looking down at the filly. She sat up in my lap, looking around with her big, expressive green eyes. I sighed, leaning down, slowly stroking her mane. "Why are you even here?" I said quietly, not expecting an answer, though I couldn't help but say it out loud. I had a feeling that this filly was here for a reason, and what that reason was, I had no idea, but I was anxious to find out. It was the next day when Jillian discovered the filly. I had fallen asleep in my bed watching TV, leaving the filly curled up on my recliner, still wrapped in my denim jacket. I awoke when something was nudging my hand. Blinking and still half asleep, I slowly leaned over the edge of my bed to see the filly standing there, looking up at me. "What?" I asked groggily. I wondered if she might be hungry or something. I sighed and slowly got out of bed, shivering a bit as my bare feet came in contact with the cold hardwood floor. I then went into the kitchen, brushing a hand through my messy dark hair. The little filly trotted along beside me. Tigger was asleep on the back of the couch, which was sitting up against the window where the morning light was pouring in, making it the ideal sleeping spot for a cat. To my surprise, Tigger had been a little afraid of the filly the evening before, and the only thing he dared to do was cautiously batter her hoof with his paw. But after a while, he seemed to sense that she wasn't dangerous, and now he could care less about her. As I opened the fridge door, I frowned. "What do I even feed you?" I asked, looking down at the filly. She blinked, standing there staring up at me. A knock on the back door made me jump. "Dad?" a voice said. Oh no, I thought. It was Jillian. I looked down at the little filly again. I knew that if I could trust anyone with the knowledge of her existence, it was Jillian. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to let her in on the secret quite yet. "Dad, are you in there?" Jillian sounded a bit worried now as she knocked on the door again. Just a minute, sweetheart," I called, hesitantly laying down, scooping up the filly in my arms. "I'll be right there." I went back into my bedroom and set the filly down on down on the bed. "Stay!" I said, as though she was a dog that was trying to train to stay on command. She just sat there, blinking. I sighed as Jillian knocked yet again. "Jillian, I'm coming," I said, a little snippier than I intended. I turned back to the filly. "Stay!" I repeated, and closed the door behind me, quickly making my way to the back door. As soon as it was open, Jillian was slipping past me into the house. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, looking around suspiciously. Then turning to me. "Is everything okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, of course, everything's fine," I said quickly. A little too quickly. Jillian blinked. She wasn't stupid. And I knew the look on her face that she knew I wasn't telling her the whole story. "Dad? Where are you hiding? You look nervous." "Nervous?" I echoed, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Really, I was—" Thump. The thump made Jillian jump a bit. "What was that?" "Nothing." The look on my daughter's face told me that she wasn't buying it. "Dad? What's in there?" Thump. Another thump was heard as something hit my bedroom door. Is there someone in there?" Jillian asked, sounding surprised. Jillian's mother had died when she was 2, and I had never remarried or even had a girlfriend. So I understood her shock at the thought of someone being in my room. I sighed. It seemed as though the jig was up. "Okay, Jill, I'll show you." "Good, because I'm going to find out what's going on around here," Jillian interrupted, grabbing the doorknob and starting to turn it. I quickly grabbed her hand. "Wait." She stopped and looked at me. I hesitated. "Before you open the door, just promise me you won't freak out, okay? Please try to stay calm." Jillian rolled her eyes, laughing. "Dad, I think I can handle it." I sighed, letting go of her arm. "That's what you think," I thought to myself as Jillian turned the knob and opened the door. How is this possible?" Jillian was sitting in the recliner, and I was on the couch, the filly sitting beside me. "I don't know," I said, shrugging. It was about 10 minutes after Jillian opened the door to find the filly standing there in my bedroom doorway, and about 5 minutes since I had explained how I find her. "This is weird. This is really weird," Jillian said, shaking her head. "Jill, you realize we can't tell anyone about this?" She nodded. "Of course, that's obvious. We can't trust anyone, not when it comes to Applejack." My heart skipped a beat. I'd been referring to the filly as, well, the filly. I hadn't truly accepted the fact that this truly and absolutely was Applejack. "You really think we should call her Applejack?" I asked, feeling ridiculous as soon as the words left my mouth. Jillian nodded. "Yeah, might as well start calling her that now. Isn't it obvious that it's really her?" "Yeah, too obvious," I mumbled. "Dad, can I stay here for the night?" I looked up at Jillian. She hadn't stayed overnight at my house since the day she moved into the apartment she shared with Sasha, which had been 3 years earlier. Yeah, of course, Jillian. I want to stay and help out." I frowned. "Help me out?" "With Applejack, of course," Jillian said, smiling. "Look at her mane. It needs a good brushing. And so could her tail." I chuckled a little, shaking my head as Jillian picked up Applejack and carried her into the bathroom next to her old bedroom. I could hear her talking to the filly as she got out a hairbrush and got to work untangling the filly's mane and tail. I felt a little better knowing that I wasn't the only one keeping the secret about Applejack. Once you retire, time seems to just fly by. Days come and go, weeks turn to months, and sometimes it seems like life passes you by in one big blur. And the last 3 months have been simply amazing. Jillian had practically moved back in with me, convinced that I needed help raising Applejack. Applejack, our little miracle pony. That's what Jill and I like to call her. The little orange pony had brought so much joy and happiness into our lives in such a short amount of time. What amazed me was, after only those few months, Applejack was already starting to speak. Not full words, of course, but she was trying her best to make sounds and say little things. I'll never forget the day I truly began to think of her as a family member. Jillian had Applejack on the kitchen countertop, and was talking baby talk to her. "You are so adorable." "Yes, you are." Applejack was cooing and giggling and making other usual baby noises. Then I walked in from the office, which was just the room I kept my computer in. Applejack's eyes lit up as soon as she saw me. "Da!" I stopped in my tracks, my heart beating hard in my chest. "Dad, did you hear that?" Jillian gasped. I nodded slowly. She couldn't be saying what I think she was trying to say. I thought to myself as I slowly walked over to the filly. She got even more excited the closer I got to her. "Da!" she squealed, laughing and nudging my hand as I reached out to stroke her neck. Jillian smiled and put her hand on my shoulder. I hadn't heard that word since, well, Jillian was a baby, just learning to speak. Tears streamed down my face as she uttered out, "Dada!" At that moment, I realized I cared for Applejack as more than just a pony, more than just a family member, but I cared for her like a daughter. Work around the farm was much easier with Applejack around. 2 years ago, she had asked me about helping outside with the chores. I was surprised, pleasantly so, when she inquired about helping out. "It's only fair, Daddy," she had said when I asked her if she was really sure she wanted to do some farm work. And boy, was she good at it. She and I got the animals fed in no time at all, and the field work was a lot easier now that I had AJ to help me. AJ was what Jillian and I had started to call Applejack 4 years ago, not long after she'd started talking. 4 years. Sometimes it was hard for me to believe that it had been that long. Jillian and I both agreed that Applejack was the best thing that ever happened to us in a long time. And I had something I never thought I would ever have. I had another daughter. Applejack had always called me Daddy ever since she was able to say whole words. At first, I had been surprised. After all, AJ was an intelligent young filly, and she was well aware of the difference between her species and mine and Jillian's. So, I at first found it odd that she referred to me as Daddy, even though she was well aware that she was adopted. Yes, adopted was the best term Jillian and I used to describe how AJ became part of the family. But deep down in my heart I knew it wasn't always going to be this way. Every day I worried that I would wake up the next morning and Applejack would be gone, or Twilight Sparkle or one of the other ponies would be there, waiting to take her back to Equestria where I knew AJ truly belonged. But after a while, after 4 amazing years, I forced those thoughts to the back of my mind. I was not going to let negative thoughts ruin my time with my daughters. I was just going to live my life and enjoy it, no matter what I was afraid might happen in the future. At 5 years old, I was certain that Applejack was at her full adult mare height. She stood about 3 feet and 4 inches tall, and had the adult voice that had gradually appeared over the last year and a half. I knew, of course, that she was however old she was on the show, but I had no clue exactly what age that was. So I had just started over, making the day I found her first birthday. I was so proud of my AJ. She was a wonderful addition to the family, and she had finally gotten her cutie mark, something she had been hoping for ever since Jillian and I explained to her what it was. It had been a year earlier that it happened, not long before her fourth birthday. Every year, ever since Jillian was little, we'd go out to the old apple tree near the bottom of the hill and pick the apples. We had always eaten a lot of apples at our house, and I wasn't really surprised when Applejack discovered her love for apples as well. After all, from watching My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, I knew that apples were what she was all about. So, naturally, she had wanted to help us when we went apple picking. Please, can I go with you and Jilly? Please, Daddy? Jillian had giggled at the nickname Applejack had given her. I smiled and nodded. Sure, come on, AJ. Yay! The little filly cheered. One thing I always found cute was Applejack's voice when she was a filly. She had sounded almost exactly like Apple Bloom, but with a slightly deeper tone. Let's load up then, girls, I said, and Jillian and Applejack followed me out to the pickup. AJ jumped into the bed of the pickup. Wow, Applejack said when we got down the hill to the tree. There sure are a lot of apples up on that tree. I chuckled and nodded. Yep, there sure are, Applejack. Jillian got the ladder out of the bed of the truck and leaned it up against the tree, making sure it was sturdy enough for her to climb up. Then, after placing the collecting baskets beneath the tree, she climbed up and started picking apples. I went and got the other ladder and followed suit. We picked apples for about 30 seconds before a cute, slightly irritated voice called up, "Hey!" Jillian and I stopped and looked down. What's the matter, Applejack? Jillian asked. I want to help too. I could hear the determination in the young Earth Pony's voice. Well, sweetie, just let me pick a few more apples. Then you can have my ladder, okay? I said. Applejack sighed and nodded. Okay, Daddy. After I picked the apples, I climbed back down to the ground. Here you go, AJ. Here you go, AJ. Let's get up. Here you go, AJ. Let's get you up there. Applejack nodded and started up the ladder. She stopped suddenly, frowning. I instantly realized what the problem was and mentally kicked myself for not thinking ahead of time. I can't, AJ said slowly, her ears drooping down. I can't climb up. She tapped the ladder angrily with her hoof. I don't have hands like you and Sissy. I can't climb. She sighed and sat down by the ladder. Don't worry, Applejack, I started. I want to help. There was that determination again. I sighed. I knew she'd be able to do it if she could reach the apples. I didn't want to say no to her. That she couldn't help, because that would just upset her more. I tried to think back to the show, tried to remember how she got the apples then, but it had been so long since I watched the show. I hadn't seen it since I adopted AJ. I couldn't quite remember how she did it. Jillian climbed down her ladder, frowning. Don't worry, Applejack. We'll find some way for you to help. The filly sighed, her ears still drooping and the hopelessness in her eyes. I bit my lip and kneed down by her. Applejack? She slowly looked up at me. What's the one thing I always taught you about situations like this? The filly sighed and didn't look like she wanted to say anything. AJ, I said with a slightly stern tone. Never give up, she mumbled. That's right, I said, nodding. Sure, you can't climb up the ladder, but you shouldn't let that stop you from trying to find a way to pick the apples with us, right? She blinked, staring up at me with those beautiful emerald eyes. Yes, Daddy. I smiled a little. So, you shouldn't let this small setback get you down, kiddo. I ruffled her forelock affectionately, making her giggle a little. Applejack looked up the tree. I could practically hear the gears working in her head as she thought. Then that afternoon she tried various ways to get the apples down. She tried throwing stuff at them. She only knocked down 2 apples and nearly hit Jillian a couple times. Let's just say AJ didn't quite have the greatest aim at the time. She had tried jumping up as high as she could to pull them off the tree. But even though she could jump pretty high, she just couldn't seem to get high enough. After about an hour, she had stopped trying and just stood there, looking frustrated. Dang it! She stomped her hoof to the ground. I noticed some of the apples vibrated a bit, and then I remembered the way she got the apples down in the show. My eyes widened. Of course, I thought. I wanted badly to say something, not liking my daughter being so discouraged, but I stayed silent, wanting to see if she figured it out on her own. She stood up, staring intently up at the apples. She slowly walked under the tree, and I could tell by the look on her face she had an idea. She stood up on her hind legs and hit the tree with her front hooves. The tree shook, and several apples fell to the ground. But there were still many of them on the tree, and even though there were more than enough apples scattered on the ground, it wasn't good enough for Applejack. With a look of determination, she turned with her rump facing the tree, reared up, and kicked the trunk with her hind legs as hard as she could. I felt the ground beneath me shake a bit as the rest of the apples fell to the ground. Applejack blinked, looking surprised. I did it! I did it! She cried, laughing, jumping around happily. Daddy, did you see that? Did you? I laughed and nodded, and Jillian kneed down and hugged her sister. Great job, AJ! I walked over and hugged her too. I'm so proud of you, Applejack. You didn't give up. You kept trying until... My eyes widened as I nudged Jillian. She looked too and smiled. AJ, she said, nodding toward something. Applejack looked behind her just as 3 red apples appeared on her flank, forming a triangular pattern. My cutie mark! Applejack cried, whooping and bucking happily. I finally got it! She tackled me and Julian in a hug, and the 3 of us laid there in the grass laughing. And then 1 year later, Applejack cut our apple harvest time in half. We even poured several more apple trees into our field to give her more to work with. And every year after that, we had more apples than what we knew what to do with. I'm so proud of my little AJ. She's like a blessing that I will forever be grateful for. But sometimes that nagging feeling ground in my head, the feeling that Applejack's time here was coming to a close. No, don't think that way, I told myself. AJ isn't going anywhere. I knew better than to give myself false hope, but in my mind, it was better to do that than to give into the realization that Applejack most likely wasn't going to be with us forever. I couldn't believe that it was going on 4 years since I discovered that small orange filly in a cardboard box. 10 wonderful years that I wouldn't trade for anything. And I know Jillian wouldn't have either. Applejack was the center of our world, and we loved her more than anything. She was so much fun and such a big help around the farm. I couldn't imagine my life without her. One day, she and I were out feeding the animals. Me with a bandana tied around my forehead, Rambo style, to keep the sweat from my eyes. AJ had her mane and tail tied back with hair ties, looking just like she did on the show, minus the cowboy hat. She sighed, wiping her forehead with her hoof. Man, it sure is hot out today. I nod. It sure is, AJ. Can we take a break, Daddy? Sure, kiddo. We finished feeding the chickens and went and sat on the back porch. Applejack kept fanning herself with her hoof. Hot, AJ? She nodded. Yeah. I'll go get some lemonade. I got up and went inside, pouring 2 glasses of lemonade. As I was heading outside, I stopped. There, on my old hat rack, was my cowboy hat. It was an old brown hat that I had for about 30 years. It had been my dad's hat, and I'm pretty sure it had been his dad's hat before. Smiling to myself, I took the hat off the rack and went back outside with the lemonade, setting the glass on the table in front of the chair AJ was sitting in. Here you go, honey. Thanks, Daddy, AJ said, taking a swig of lemonade. You're welcome. Oh, and here. I reached down and put the cowboy hat on her head. Instantly, it changed to look exactly like the hat AJ wore on the show. I blinked, surprised. Applejack took off the hat, studying it. What's the hat for, Day? Well, I saw how hot you were out there. Figured a hat might help shade you a little. I grinned. Plus, you look so adorable. Applejack blushed. Daddy, she said, embarrassed. What? It's true. Applejack just rolled her eyes. Typical daughter, I thought, getting embarrassed by her father. I sighed and sat down in my chair next to AJ's. Thanks for the hat, Daddy. I really like it. No problem. That was your grandfather's hat, you know. Applejack liked that. Really? Her eyes lit up a little. I nodded. Yep, and I'm pretty sure it was his father's hat before him. I'll be sure to take good care of it, Daddy. I know you will, AJ, I said, ruffling her forelock. She giggled. Daddy! She quickly smoothed out her forelock. I snickered. What are you two snickering about? AJ and I turned to see Jillian walking toward us.